All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today for what is going to be the final webinar in the National Community Solar Partnerships Building with Benefits series. We are really excited for this conversation today. We know we rescheduled it, but we did so in order to make sure that all of these really incredible panelists could be here with us today. And we're really excited for this conversation. We think it's going to be one of our best always. So Sarah, why don't we go ahead to the next slide? Before we jump into the content today, just a few housekeeping items. So this session is being recorded, and both the slides that we'll show during the presentation today and a link to the recording are going to be made available to you online after the event, as well as recordings from all of the other webinars in this series. And then as we're going through the session today, we invite you to use both the chat and the Q&A, but if you have a direct question for our panelists, feel free to put it in at any time, but please do use the Q&A function so that we can make sure that we're highlighting those questions for our panelists. Next slide. Okay, so before we jump into our official content, I once again want to welcome you all to this webinar of the Building with Benefits series, a series we've been running for most of this summer, really exploring what the meaningful benefits are for community solar and how we might be able to grow them and scale the delivery of those benefits across all community solar projects. So today's focus is community ownership. This is one of our most engaging topics, and as I mentioned, we're really excited to have this group of panelists to discuss it today. So as we're getting started and going through this introductory material, we encourage you to use the chat. Please feel free to introduce yourself, share your name and your organization, and then what community-owned community solar means to you. I think we'll explore today. There are lots of different ways to think about community ownership, and we're excited to see what your framing is. Go to the next slide. Before we jump in, I want to give everyone a little bit of our roadmap for today. So first, I'll share some brief context on the National Community Solar Partnership and how we're thinking about meaningful benefits across all of our work. And then we'll start to hear from our panelists. So starting with Mafojane, the co-executive director of the People's Solar Energy Fund. And Mac is going to share about the landscape broadly of community-owned community solar. And then after that, our panelists will share how their community solar projects that they've developed have built business models that prioritize community ownership and how they've been thinking about this. And all of these panelists have been a part of projects that have won a Sunny Awards from the National Community Solar Partnership for their inclusion of community ownership as a meaningful benefit. So they'll be talking a little bit about those projects for us. After that, we'll have some time for discussion among those panelists. And then we'll have some time, of course, for Q&A from the audience as well before we wrap up and share a few ways for you to stay engaged with the National Community Solar Partnership. Next slide, please. And we can go one more. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so let's dive into the content. And before we talk about the models of community ownership or even really what community solar is, really want to highlight why community solar is so important and so important to the Department of Energy. So the slide here talks about one of the foundations for why the Department of Energy is thinking about community solar. So the National Renewable Energy Labs did a study a few years ago to help us get a better sense for who has the ability to install solar on their roof and then of course access all of those benefits that come along with having solar on their own building. And what they found was that about half of all households and businesses can't host a system on their own roof, which means they are lacking the access to those benefits as well. So community solar allows households and businesses to subscribe to and then receive benefits from an off-site solar PV system that's not located on their roof, which means it has the opportunity to fill the gap in access to clean energy, that 50% gap. So when we're thinking about community solar broadly, as it is right now, there's still far less community solar on the grid than is needed to really close that gap in an accessible and equitable way. So when we're looking at all of the electricity that's generated in the US, solar makes up about 10% of that electricity generation. That's that blue slice there. And then community solar is actually a very small yellow sliver that is nearly impossible to see on this pie chart. It's making up less than 5% of the solar generation, so a very small percentage of all generation. And despite being an especially valuable resource for households with high energy burdens or limited incomes, of all of that community solar, just 1% right now is dedicated to low and moderate income households. So this is really the motivation for the National Community Solar Partnership. So what we want to be able to do is to provide resources to support more equitable access to affordable community solar for all households. You can go to the next slide. So how do we do that? These webinars that you're participating in, and we can share more about the other webinars in this series, they're part of a much broader suite of resources that are provided by the National Community Solar Partnership, which includes 3 main areas. So the first is data tracking and publicly sharing both our data and our analysis on the community solar market and other policy topics germane to the community solar market. We also have an online community platform that can connect you with over 1,500 other members. And then we have a very robust technical assistance program, which right now offers one-on-one technical assistance on demand and at no cost to any of our members. Go to the next slide. We've also developed a set of initiatives that are designed to address what we heard from stakeholders as the main barriers to deploying more equitable community solar. So including having more resources to build technical expertise and capacity, having more engagement and leadership from states, having greater and more equitable access to capital to develop projects, having more tools for engaging with customers and ultimately acquiring customers for projects, and then of course more education and outreach on community solar as a concept and the benefits that it can provide. And these initiatives are all building towards a target that we set a couple of years ago, that by 2025, we want to be able to power the equivalent of 5 million households with community solar and be able to provide $1 billion in savings associated with those community solar subscriptions. Go to the next slide. And so when we're thinking about putting that much community solar on the grid, we're not just thinking about capacity, we're really thinking about what the outcomes are. So what is the good that is done by putting that much community solar on the grid? So NCSP, along with our stakeholders, have identified a set of meaningful benefits of community solar that allow the benefits to be shared and ensure that everyone has equitable access to the solar transition. So these benefits, of course, include community ownership. That's what we'll be focused on today. But other significant benefits can be derived from more access to low and moderate income households, greater household savings, increased resilience during grid outages or stronger grid operations, and the creation of a larger and more diverse workforce and a set of businesses supporting the industry. So if you're curious about any of these other benefits that we're not covering today, again, we do have recordings from all of the other webinars in this series, and we'll gladly link them here. So let's go to the next slide. So before we jump in, I do want to acknowledge one opportunity that is also related to these meaningful benefits. Our Community Power Accelerator has opened a second round of its prize. And Sarah, if we can go to the next slide, I'll share just a tiny bit of information about it before we jump in, and then we'll send out more information along with these slides when we wrap up today. But just wanted to let this group know that this $10 million prize is open and taking applications through October 4th. And it's a prize really designed for those that are either new to community solar, so developing their first set of community solar projects, or really trying to transition their projects to be able to infuse more of these meaningful benefits that we're discussing today. We know that access to financing, access to that capital and philanthropic funding can be challenging. So the Community Power Accelerator and this prize are designed to support developers and community-based organizations to be able to access that funding and get their projects ready for conversations about financing. So look out for more information on that, but wanted to make sure we noted that for everyone. Go to the next slide. And at this point, I'm excited to get to the reason that you're all here today, to hear about all of the mechanisms, decision points, and partnerships that lead to the successful delivery of the benefit of community ownership. And leading this conversation from here on out is our moderator, Zoe, with the Solar United Neighbors. So Zoe, I will hand it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here. Great to be here and to be able to facilitate our discussion for the next portion. And we are, privileged to be able to start off with an industry presenter. And kicking us off will be Mafojane, and Mac is arriving from the People's Solar Energy Fund. Mac, happy to pass the mic on to you. Welcome.
Thanks, Zoe. And thanks to everyone for attending today. My name is Mmakgantsi Mafojane, also go by Mac, and I'm one of the co-directors of the People's Solar Energy Fund. You can go to the next slide. The People's Solar Energy Fund, or PSEF, is a member-organized nonprofit working to advance energy democracy by supporting the development of community-owned and grassroots-led clean energy projects, and we do so by providing access to capital, technical assistance, and shared services to support community projects with a primary focus on low-income communities and communities of color. Move to the I'll be giving a high level of the energy project. Then I'll the panelists. I'll focus on wind projects, but I'll keep it to solar. So communities, I think, at the DOE, any which the benefits of a certain project flow to multiple customers, such as individuals, businesses, and profit. Could allow without tops owners to enjoy. I do want to start off by acknowledging that we are a diverse group, different states, and community solar and of ownership, local communities.
Mac, we're having a little trouble.
On policies are in place. Ownership. Can you?
Mac, we're having a little trouble hearing you, so I think maybe we'll pause and move on to our next presenter and see if we can fix audio issues, and then have you come back and restart this presentation so that we can get all the great information. So if it's okay with everyone, I think we'll jump ahead to the next section of this and come back to Mac.
And I'm just skipping through these slides to get there to Crystal.
Thanks, Sarah, for that helpful TA. And as we reset our slide deck, and we'll shortly be hearing from Crystal Huang with the People's Power Solar Cooperative.
And Crystal, your slides are ready to go.
Great. Hi, everyone. So good to be here with you all. Really excited to go back into what Mmakgantsi had to share about what People's Solar Energy Fund has done. But before we go there, we're really excited to be sharing about what People Power Solar Cooperative is doing in California. So as our name goes, we are People Power Solar Cooperative. Hold on, why is this telling me to unmute myself? It looks like I'm unmuted. Can folks hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it's really important for us to really think about what energy is if we're really talking about energy benefit. So generally what we like to share with our members is that getting people to understand that many of us think of energy as just a monthly bill to pay or something that contributes to pollution in our communities. And that's because we've been trained to be consumers, and our understanding of energy has been very limited as a result. So when things mess up with our power system, power company, power plant around us, oh, it's just how it is. Trust the company, they're doing their best. And oh, by the way, you have to pay for it. It's generally the experience that people tend to have. So at People Power Solar Cooperative, we activate folks to understand that clean energy is so much more than just decarbonizing and energy savings. Building energy project is just the tip of the iceberg that you can see on the slide. I think we need to go back to the slide, Sarah. If we can go, yes, there you go. As we build electrical power, we're also building economic and political power to change a system that are no longer serving us. And whatever that might be, it's just really this constant evolution of how do we actually improve our societal benefit. And it's for this reason we really call ourselves a movement cooperative. We're not just here to build a cooperative business model, we're here to build a movement. And the movement all starts with our understanding of energy and life. So we'll do a brief introduction of what People Power Solar Cooperative is. So we can go to the next slide now. We really support grassroots-led, cooperatively governed projects that activate life-affirming energy systems. We were founded in 2018 and we're incubated by the Sustainable Economies Law Center in California. Also work closely with the Sustainable Economies Law Center to organize community-owned energy projects, despite the lack of community solar policy in California that allows people to do that. So today we have over 150 members across California, most of whom live in the Bay Area. Most of them are renters and low-income homeowners who cannot get benefit to solar. Next slide. So quick understanding of why we do what we do is our mission. We exist to create a just and inclusive transition to renewable energy by enabling everyone to own and shape our energy future. And again, I'm going to go back to the beginning. Energy future is more than just our bill savings. Energy future is about the health of our planet, is about everything that encompasses our lives and our ability to survive and our ability to thrive. So how do we actually enable everyone, especially those people who do not have their infrastructure decision power around their homes or around their neighborhood, to be able to understand the power is actually within them, and when we come together, we can get there. So next slide. What we are doing here at People Power Solar Cooperative is we are a multi-stakeholder cooperative of hundreds of community members, and we kind of see ourselves like a grid for a transmission and distribution of another kind of power. It's a combined, connected, and amplified potential of many people sharing resources, ideas, skills, connections, labor, and in infinite creative ways. And I'll walk you through a few examples of how we do that. Next slide is a picture of our members coming together to do a member election. It's just a quick picture. And the next slide, we have an example of a community development corporation called the Black Cultural Zone in East Oakland, trying to work to establish some local economy in the community. So then when the neighborhoods are getting better, we still have the same neighborhood. The initiative is called A Better Neighborhood, Same Neighbors, so to fight back gentrification. And as communities are doing that, creating spaces that local businesses, Black businesses, can actually start to learn from each other, work with each other, and have better relationship with each other, so they can actually establish some roots, deepen the roots within the community. They're also thinking about power. So how do they start thinking about power in a way that actually understand power, not just as something to buy, but really as something that they themselves coming together could look like? So we come together and activate the zones and get people engaging and understand what energy is. Next slide. And here's another example. And the next slide is Battery Collective. When the power goes out, if you have solar and battery in your home, you're good for the most part. But if you don't, because you cannot afford it, or because your property owners don't care for it or cannot afford it either, what do? So what we do, generally we see some programs out there that enables cheap or subsidized batteries that allows communities with disability and really critical needs to actually have access to these power. What we do is, instead of again, focusing on individual household helping themselves. How can we actually build a community-based solution? So Battery Collective is a way for communities to start sharing batteries, moving electrons from houses that still have power to houses that no longer have power because of the blackouts that happen, rolling blackouts, or even inability to pay, for communities to take care of each other. And the next slide, we have the oh, I forgot to change the title, but and another example of how our members are coming together to connect the efforts on the ground, where there are urban farmers, and also we have many encampments, houseless encampments. How do we actually get people to understand energy as a human right, and also work on food security by putting power into the communities building these solutions, supporting each other so that we can reduce violence. So we have an example here in West Oakland where our members worked with a urban farm in West Oakland and connected solar and battery with a refrigerator to put out fresh fruits and vegetables for the houseless encampment on the side, so people can still feel a sense of community as we work towards housing security and food security. So next slide. In summary, our strategy is to connect action to transformative learning. It's not enough to just take action to meet the immediate needs. We also need to understand the deeper system that we're trying to change. It's not enough to say no fossil fuel and yes renewable energy. We need to go deeper into understanding how do we actually start practicing being with power, so then our relationship with power is not just that of a consumerist. So through these projects, as people are building and being in much more intentional and active engagement with energy, people can start to begin to think about what the energy future could look like. So as a little summary for the next slide, People Power Solar Cooperative, we see ourselves also kind of like a toolbox of resources to support groups to build their solar projects. So as a cooperative, we have staff, like myself included, that supports technical, legal, administrative work. We also work with members who have a lot of amazing know-how. They come from the energy sector, including solar industry, and really want to support the movement of communities coming together and try to figure out what the future of energy could look like and design it ourselves. So then community groups like the farmers, like the local community development corporations, like the people who are trying to support with housing justice, can really look at themselves also as energy experts and come together and truly start shaping the energy future, so that we're not just relying on the energy engineers and the technical and the financing and the lawyers to shape our energy future. So we get the everyday people to be the expert. So it goes to the next slide here. Just wanted to use an example of how we use existing solar policy like net energy metering as a way to also help build wealth. As everyone, I'm sure most people on the call knows, that net energy metering is a really great policy for rooftop solar, and that really benefits the property owner of that rooftop. So we also look at this and try to see, how do we creatively look at the energy project in the way that actually also build wealth for the community. So we won our Sunny Award with, next slide, with a photo of community helping one property owner to go solar, but it is owned by the cooperative. So members of our cooperative, mostly renters and low-income owners, who cannot go solar and get financial benefit from going solar, can actually come together and distribute wealth. So I don't know if we have time to go through how exactly that works, but I can quickly fly through that. So we can go to the next slide without getting into the details. So we call this a commons model, and you'll see how the flowchart work. I'll walk you through this very quickly. So the idea here is to disconnect the ownership of land from the ownership of energy, so then people can start to think about shaping our energy future together. So we go down the next slide, just meeting Verdette here. Verdette, she's heard about her community organizing with People Power Solar Cooperative for solar on the roof of an individual, and found a really empowering opportunity to actually engage deeper with your community by taking $100 to buy a share of the cooperative. The cooperative then used the money pooled from the community to purchase the hardware and pay for the installation on the individual's roof. And then the individual, just like a very typical power purchase agreement, if you go on the next step, power purchase agreement. So the individual is basically the off-taker in this case, will then pay for power to the cooperative. What's very different here is that the cooperatives then, instead of just benefiting the shareholders of a company, like in a typical power purchase agreement, because our company is being owned by the members as a cooperative corporation, our cooperative then pay an annual interest back to members like Verdette, offering her slice of her bill savings that the solar project has created. So in summary, what we're doing here is to build power, create opportunities, next slide, to create opportunities for members to really practice what being in power with power looks like. And if we could just go down 2 slides, I'll just kind of just show you the exact and summary of the fact that People Power is a movement cooperative that enables everyone to realize the powerful benefit of community energy ownership beyond just bill saving, really practicing a space of what being with relationship with energy really looks like. And I think that is my time, and I would just stop right here. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Crystal. It's great to hear, all the great work that you're contributing to, particularly out west. And so we're going to take a quick step back and continue hearing from Mac now that we have been able to update some of those tech features on her end. So again, Mac, if you want to turn your audio and camera on, we'll kick it back to you.
Thanks, Zoe. And my apologies for the technical issues there. Hopefully my internet holds this time around. I think if we can go back to slide, I guess the slide that says, what is ownership? I was about to just give an overview of ownership as we think about it. I think, one thing to point out is that there's a traditional sort of legal property law definition of ownership, which refers to a bundle of rights to use, possess, dispose, and exclude others from a specific thing. And in this case, we're referring to project assets. And for us, instead of taking this very sort of prescriptive, legalistic definition that doesn't necessarily envision values and goals of communities that maybe don't believe in the commodification of energy, we find it helpful to think about ownership in terms of what it unlocks for local community stakeholders. And you can move to the next slide, please. The Institute of Local Self-Reliance recently released an insightful report which sets out a helpful framework for thinking about local community ownership and focuses on these 3 key dimensions of local clean energy ownership. And they are who the official project owners are, how is it governed? Do local community members have decision-making power, and who reaps the benefits? So in thinking about it, and for the purposes of this discussion, we'll borrow from this helpful framework. Next slide, please. So thinking about why community ownership, why is it important? For PCF and many of our members, we don't see this as ownership just for the sake of ownership, but as a tool for inclusion, equity, and economic development, addressing many of the inequities that frontline and low-income communities and communities of color face and continue to face. We know that Hispanic and Black households have median energy burdens 20 and 43% higher than their white counterparts, and that median energy burden of renters is 13% higher than that of owners. So while a shift to clean energy is absolutely necessary, access to solar hasn't been equitable. Next slide. And just another stat here, according to Lawrence Berkeley National Labs Residential Solar Adopter Income and Demographic Trends Report of 22, there's still some glaring disparities in the adoption of residential and community solar. And these span across income, race, and home ownership status. As you can see from these graphs, across all solar adopters in 2021, only 22% had household incomes under 80% of area median income, which is a common measure for low or low to moderate household income. And across race, across all solar developers in 21, the study showed that Black and Hispanic households are underrepresented relative to the general population in each state. So community ownership really provides a direct pathway for communities with the highest energy burdens, and those communities that are most impacted by a climate crisis. Provides this way to participate in a clean energy economy and also reap the benefits of economic, environmental, and social benefits of clean energy. So as a model for advancing a just transition, community ownership of solar has the potential to be one of the most inclusive and equitable models for renewable energy deployment. Next slide, please. Okay, so touching on a few of the benefits, and I think Anna laid these out pretty well, but looking at these benefits sort of in contrast to sort of traditional developer-led models of community solar, we have things like expanded access. And while this applies to community solar in general, where communities have a say in the design of the projects, there's less of a likelihood that owner subscribers will be subjected to onerous credit checks, which we find tend to exclude low income and communities of color. So there's an opportunity for even greater access here. And similarly, maximized electricity bill savings. When projects are community driven and owned, there's a greater potential to maximize bill savings in contrast to investor-owned projects where maximizing profits might take priority. And then there's workforce development. We've touched on that, but I think one of the key things is wealth building. And we've heard from Crystal's model, and I think we'll hear from the other panelists as well, that the ownership component really allows folks to not just receive the bill credits, but also receive a return on an equity stake, which for the communities that we seek to serve, this is a real pathway towards resilient communities. Next slide. So I was going to quickly run through two models of community-owned solar projects. There's more, of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There's multiple models. I think the two that I wanted to touch on were the shared subscription model, or the community-owned shared model, which is probably the one that resonates the most when people hear about community-owned solar. And then the model which Crystal just outlined is a community-owned project for community power purchase agreements. There's also other models such as bulk buying programs and community-owned projects for utilities, which I won't cover. Next slide, please. So in this model, I think Timothy is probably going to outline this in greater detail, so I won't spend too much time on it. But this is a model that Cooperative Energy Futures has used pretty successfully. And under this model, a community-based solar developer can own and operate the shared solar array for the benefits of its subscriber, who may be members if it's a co-op, or a community if it's a nonprofit or tribal entity. And the shared solar array delivers electricity to the utility, which then allocates the payments via bill credits to participating subscribers. And once the community-based solar developer has covered expenses and paid financing, they're able to distribute profits to members. So this is a model that really requires enabling policy, including virtual net metering, but is an easy way for LMI and BIPOC communities to benefit from community ownership. And also generates monthly savings and builds local political power. Next slide, please. This is the model that Crystal outlined, so I won't go into it in too much detail. It's a model that I think it's important to highlight because, as mentioned, not every state has community solar policies in place. But in cases where there is net metering in place, this is a model, a sort of PPA model that enables communities, low-income households and community organizations to get involved an ownership stake in solar. There's might require additional design, but it's a lower investment. Or a sustainable model requires a large volume of projects. Okay, so I will quickly just say, and we can move on to the next slide. Community. There are policies in place, but not in every state. There's policies in about 22 states in DC. And as Anna also mentioned, there is only 1% of community-owned solar that is of the community solar that has. Slide.
Apologies, Mac. We seem to be having some continuing tech issues with your sound. And so if you do want to maybe send a chat to Sarah on our tech end. Otherwise,
it's really so, sorry. Sorry, Zoe. This as a really sort of beneficial model for an transition.
So Max, sorry that we are having some more tech issues, and just for the interest of continuing to have our conversation forward, we may just come back to you when we do transition to our full panel discussion with all of today's panelists. So thank you for your stick-to-itiveness there. But before we introduce our next panelist, I do want to encourage folks to please use the Q&A function if you have any questions from Crystal and also Mac's presentation so far, and then our next panelist. So please join me in welcoming Timothy Den Herberger Thomas, and Timothy arrives from the Cooperative Energy Futures. So Tim, happy to have you join our panel. Please take the floor.
Thank you, and thank you all for attending. My name is Timothy Denherger Thomas. I'm General Manager at Cooperative Energy Futures. We are a member-owned clean energy cooperative based in Minnesota. We are a member of the People's Solar Energy Fund, and along with Mac and Crystal and a couple dozen other organizations that are doing this work. And I'm going to be sharing about our model in Minnesota, which is an example of a location that does have strong community solar policy, and particularly talking about the cooperative ownership model and how that can really empower access to ownership and wealth building. So if you go to the next slide, just providing some examples of projects that we've done. We do a mix of rural ground mount projects in greater Minnesota, as well as urban projects. We do rooftops, and this is our project that is a parking canopy in downtown Minneapolis. If you go to the next slide, we really focus on projects where people can come together. On the left is our first launch event for our very first project. This is back in 2018 on the roof of the Shiloh Temple, which is a church in North Minneapolis. And on the right is our Ramp A project, which you just saw on the previous slide, and a member gathering that we had just after we launched this project in late 2019. If you go to the next slide. We are also outside of the traditional community solar model, doing something that's a little bit more like what Crystal talked about, where it's a power purchase agreement. But we have incentives in Minnesota that are allowing us to do direct power purchase agreements to low-income renters. So what you're seeing on that roof is actually a model where we're doing multiple solar arrays that are connected to individual unit meters, but we operate and finance just like a community solar array. So that people can participate at a deep discount with no upfront cost. So that's a little bit about what we do. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to focus next just on what we've accomplished. As of end of last year, we had just over 1,000 member owners, about 700 of which were actively getting subscription benefits. We're roughly doubling that capacity over the next year. We have about 6.8 megawatts of projects in operation. You can see some of the results here. I wanted to draw attention to the cash distributions and equity that we have so far distributed to our members. And I want to highlight, while those numbers are small right now, you'll see a table towards the end of my presentation where you look at how that projects out over the 25-year life of a project. And what we generally find is that in the early years, when a project is often partnering with an investor to use federal tax benefits and paying off project debt, that the wealth building opportunity is pretty modest. But in the long run, it can roughly, I mean, depends on your rates and economics in your community, but can roughly or even more than double the benefits that communities are receiving. Again, the 6.8 megawatts we've developed to date, we're roughly doubling that over the next year, and just we're very successful in securing some changes to Minnesota's community solar policy that will orient the development here much more towards low income and community ownership. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to focus really on what it means to be a co-op and what cooperative ownership means. We think of it really as three pieces. First is democratic control. So our subscribers are member owners. We're structured with one member, one vote, just like pretty much all cooperatives. Our board of directors is made up of members who run for the board. The members also elect the board of directors, and then our bylaws also governs key decisions that are made directly by the members, for example, at our annual meeting. So we really care about making sure that people in community who are benefiting from our services have a direct governance stake in the organization. Second, cooperative is based on sharing wealth based on your economic participation. And in most cooperatives and definitely most community solar co-ops, economic participation is based on use. So we distribute annual dividends, which is essentially a share of the co-op's profits based on the share of energy that is purchased or credited to each individual household. There are rules in different states as to how can co-ops distribute that between cash and equity. So essentially what we're doing on an annual basis is as we generate profit, distributing a portion of that dividend as direct cash, whether that's a check or credit against your account if you're paying on a monthly basis in an ongoing way. And then also equity, which is effectively stock in the business that grows over time as the co-op develops. And again, just to highlight, for many renters and low-income households, that's a pathway to build wealth that you don't have access to if you can't access home ownership or don't have substantial wealth to invest. This is really about access. The third key thing I really want to stress is you can design a co-op, as we have, to make it very accessible. So a CF membership share costs $25. We've even created structures where people can prorate that over multiple months if a $25 is a barrier. But it's not a large upfront investment that we're asking people to make. And again, the share of ownership is not based on you've put a lot of money in on the front end. It's based on you're using the services on an ongoing basis. So you can use a subscription model, which has the accessibility benefits of a monthly payment approach, where somebody's getting savings on their utility bill every month that's larger than their subscription payment, and still deliver those ownership benefits if you use a cooperative model. Because again, in a cooperative, you define ownership based on use as opposed to upfront capital. That's really the core insight of how we look at cooperative ownership as a way to equitably build wealth, so that it's not just for those who have existing capital. Wanted to talk briefly about the structure. If you go to the next slide, a lot of people ask, how do you finance these sorts of projects? Historically, prior to the Inflation Reduction Act, we essentially form partnerships with a tax equity investor, partnership flip model for those of you who are familiar or want more of the details. Where Cooperative Energy Futures partners with an investor. We did one of these as a standalone for project. We've also done one of these as a holding company with 7 different projects under it. That investor is putting up a portion of the cost, usually 30 to 40%, and they get 99% of the ownership for the first 6 years, which allows them to take 99% of the tax benefits and depreciation benefits. And then ownership automatically flips so that the co-op, Cooperative Energy Futures, becomes the 95% owner starting in year 7. And then there's the option to buy the investor out. You can also structure these partnerships so that the net cash after you've paid operating expenses, financing costs, is distributed on a different proportion. So we've actually structured this so that the majority of the net cash is delivered to the cooperative from day 1. And then again, if you have a holding company structure, then each individual project is under that. The key link in a co-op is that the subscribers who have contracts to purchase a certain amount of energy benefits and get credit on the utility bill have those contracts with their individual projects. So for example, I'm a subscriber with the CEF Ramp Community Solar Project, but I'm also a member in the cooperative, and our other 700 subscribers are all members in the co-op. So you're purchasing energy benefits from your specific project, but you're a member owner of the co-op. So as profit flows up through the project companies and is allocated to the co-op, first to sustain its own operations, as the co-op generates profits, it's distributed back to the membership. And we found this to be a particularly powerful model for how you scale this. How do you make sure that many people in many communities can benefit from it while building an organizational and staff team that is sustainable? If you go to the next slide. I just wanted to share briefly how we see the economic benefits of cooperative ownership play out over time. I mentioned that in the early years, there are pretty limited net profits from these projects, at least in our economic context in Minnesota. But what we've tended to see in our modeling is that essentially after the period where that investor member is in place, that extra benefit from community ownership starts to kick in a meaningful way. And then once you've paid off project debt, it really becomes quite significant. And if you look at it over the life of the project, in our case, it nearly doubles the financial benefits. This is, again, already off of the subscription pricing baseline that we find to be pretty favorable in comparison to private developers in the market, where people get more and more benefits over time. And again, that's really governed by our cooperative model that is focused on member benefit and member interest. With that, I'm going to close. My last slide is just my contact information, and look forward to participating in the Q&A after our final presentation.
Thank you so much, Timothy. That was so informative. And so for our next presentation, we actually have a joint presentation with 2 contributors. And so please join me in welcoming Dan Orzak with the Oregon Clean Power Cooperative, along with Ray Sanchez Pescador with Solarize Road. So Dan and Ray, happy to have you on the panel.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Orzak, General Manager of the Oregon Clean Power Co-op. And I'm going to, so we're not distracting with multiple presenters, I'm going to give the presentation, and Ray is available on the panel for questions. And I've got a lot of slides, so we're going to flip through them quickly. So next slide. And Sarah, I'm just going to say next. So our mission is twofold: to increase the amount of renewable energy in the state of Oregon, but to do that through a community lens, if you will. Next. Community solar is one of those, I think of it like one of those terms like sustainability that's so broad that it covers a lot of different things. So there are actually at least 4 different types of community solar in Oregon. Upper left is, while COUs actually serve roughly 1/3 of the state, their community solar programs are minuscule, so we're not going to talk about those. On the right, you have what I call community solar with a capital C, which is the program run under the Oregon PUC, enabled by the legislature. And there's 2 different flavors of that we're going to talk about. And then lower left is what we call co-op solar, which is similar to what you've been hearing about from some of the other presenters. Often we use a PPA. And that is an investment model. And no size fits all is what we've learned. So next slide, please. So community solar with a capital C, when the legislature conceived this program, I think what they were thinking of was a neighborhood. So my roof doesn't work for solar, but my neighbor's does. Let's put solar on their roof and we'll share the benefits. And you can see that reflected in the minimum size, which is 25 kW for community solar projects. Well, no one's going to build a 25 kW community solar project. It's just not going to happen. The complexity of the program and interconnection and all the financing, all the different pieces means that the only sizable projects are going to happen. Next project, or next slide, please. So what are you looking at here? Well, you're looking at a solar project, right? On the Oregon Shakespeare Festival production building roof in Talent, Oregon, Southern Oregon. Well, not exactly. You're actually looking at two completely different solar projects. So on the right is what we call co-op solar, and on the left is community solar with a capital C, but with a particular flavor, which I'll talk about. Next slide. So the project on the right, co-op solar, is owned by the co-op and financed by our members who are also the investors. So it's a little bit different than what Community Energy Futures, the approach that they're taking. On the left is a community solar with a capital C, but this is owned. So next slide. And what we've seen is that the boundaries are messy, right? So there's a subscription model to community solar, that's the common model, and then the ownership model that we're using on the left. But there's also, in this project, there's subscribers as well as owners. And next. And there could also be investors who put up the initial capital, say, construction finance potentially. Next. And these could be the same people, right? So in fact, there is at least one person that we know who is participating in both projects. They're invested in the co-op project and they're an owner in the community solar project. All right, next slide. So different, one size does not fit all. Co-op projects can be done anywhere in the state of Oregon, even in COU territories. And the community solar program with a capital C only covers the RU territories. Next. Other differences, the co-op project is a net meter project, has to be connected to a building. Community solar can be connected to the grid, so it's as long as it's in the utility territory, it's geography independent. Next. And that electrical, the form of the electrical connection also means that you can put a battery on a co-op project, which in fact we did. And there's really no mechanism for putting a energy storage on a community solar project. Next. And the other implication of the electrical connection is that you need a building to put up a solar project, or at least a meter. And community solar with a capital C can go anywhere that where the grid can take it. Next. So I want to give an example, a couple of examples, hopefully we have time, of community solar projects that we're working on. We're working on one which is going to be 100% low income for the City of Talent. City of Talent is a lovely little community, economically challenged. And next slide. Even more economically challenged after a wildfire swept through the town 3 years ago and literally destroyed 40% of the town. So there is no space inside the town to do community solar. And so the community solar program enables us to put the project outside, but all the benefits go to the residents, particularly the low-income residents of the city. Next slide. Okay, so we're probably all familiar with the subscription model for community solar, but the ownership model that we use, and Solarize Rogue pioneered this. I like to think of it as it's just like putting solar up excuse me, on your own roof, but it's going somewhere else. So you benefit from the volume pricing of the project. We find that the larger projects are probably going to be about half the cost of putting solar up on individual roofs. Just like a subscription community solar project, the utilities are required to act as a billing middleman, so it all shows up on the bill. And the participants put up the initial funding and legally own the solar panels, so they receive the tax credits, and then they receive the bill credits on their bill. Next. Target audiences, community solar, I think we all know, can serve anyone, whether their roof works for solar or not, and including low-income people who may not own their own roof. Next slide. And some of the challenges we've run into. The program actually is limited in size. There's no guarantee that it will be increased, and it is just at about capacity right now. So there's policy issues. There's also interconnection issues. Utilities, of course, have the responsibility to maintain grid reliability, so we have to follow their interconnection procedures, but they're not really set up for a bunch of distributed energy resources going onto the grid, and that has, at least in Oregon, caused some friction between community solar developers and the IOUs. Next. So community benefits, cost benefits, you can take your community solar with you when you move, and that's also true for co-op solar, just about at a time. So I think we're going to flip through really quickly. Next. We have about a half a dozen projects coming. Some of them are agrivoltaics. This is actually an existing project that we did, research project in collaboration with Oregon State University. And next. So this is the co-op model. And like some of the other models that we've heard about, we put these projects up on what we call community organizations, a few businesses, but mostly churches, schools, local governments, and so on. And next. So our model is a little bit different than the co-op model we've heard about. What we do is actually sell shares of stock. So it's we call it crowd vesting. And that's what finances the projects, along with tax credits and grants. We've used PPAs in the past. Next slide. So to invest in a project, you have to be an Oregon resident. Join the co-op. We're twice as expensive as Timothy's fee. We're $50 for a lifetime membership. We take those funds, we build a solar project that then generates savings, and we use that revenue stream to pay back the members, typically over 10 years. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is, next slide, that we can do things that wouldn't be done otherwise. So the commercial solar developers are not going to do some of the projects that we do. This is a approximately 125-year-old Bureau of Indian Affairs building called the Commissary on the Warm Springs Reservation, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs in Central Oregon. And it, when the tribes were forcibly moved there, it was where the food was stored that kept them alive. And so they were dependent on the Bureau of Indian Affairs for their food sources. So it symbolizes that period of dependency and oppression to the tribes. And what they're doing is, next slide, turning it into a net zero small business incubator. That you can see the commissary building is on the far left there with solar panels on the roof. And so we are doing the solar. We're helping them finance the solar for this project. So that's all I've got. Next slide. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists. And next, we're going to open things up and move to the open panel discussion portion of our webinar. And so just give it a moment for everyone's video and audio to come back up. And thanks for everyone who has been able to contribute your question or comment using the Q&A function in Zoom. And I see that Timothy's been really generous to provide some responses. And so now we do want to offer up some other points. And so I think, first of all, thanks to Timothy and also to Dan, who I think you both provided some, and even Crystal, some really high level definitions of what community solar can look like. And so, and you're all coming from different parts of the country. And so what I think that other folks are probably really curious to learn more is the how. And so, to start off, if folks could possibly respond to how do you measure and quantify the impacts of community solar? And also if you can also respond to what are the mechanisms or kind of policy instruments that are required to really see or allow for community ownership. So there's two perspectives that you could respond to. And I'll let whoever wants to weigh in first.
I can weigh in on the measurement question. It's pretty typical in a community solar project to start by asking, what is the percent savings or sort of upfront bill benefit? The extension for community ownership is really just asking the question, well, on top of that, what are the other benefits? In terms of profit sharing, you could also look at other factors like local economic development, workforce contracting, that sort of thing. One of the things which we like to do, and again, this Institute for Local Self-Reliance report that's been referenced a few times, does a really good kind of theoretical approach to how you would do this. One of the things we like to do is to think about what is the lifetime energy value of a project, and then what portion of that is going to immediate subscriber savings, profit sharing with community members, paying for the system up front, financing costs, operating costs. You can really look at the total financial value of a project as being broken down all of those different ways and measuring, where's the value going.
I can jump in there with the response as well. So so there's different benefits, right? So financial benefit for our co-op projects, we've been paying 4%, up to 4% APR over 10 years. So you can easily quantify that. Community solar ownership model, people they buy the solar panels up front, and we expect a payback time of around between 8 and 10 years, let's say. But there are other benefits as well, right? So the what we call the co-op model, PPA model, whatever you want to call it, there's an intangible benefit to seeing solar go up in your community and being able to point to it and say, I own a share of that. So on your church, on the roof of your church or your kid's school, or your fire station with a battery there, so that you know that if the grid goes out during a natural disaster, you've got electrical power somewhere in the community. And Ray, do you want to talk about the response of our low-income participants?
Yeah, in the state of Oregon, the legislature actually defined that 10% of the energy, at least 10% of the energy that a community solar project produces has to be designated or sold to low-income families as defined by the state at a discount. And so we have in the project that's behind me, the OSF project that Dan talked about, we have two families that are low-income families that were validated by the state, and they are receiving energy at a 20% discount. What is interesting when we talk to them is that they can't wait for us to build another projects because they're anxious to tell their friends, their neighbors, their relatives, whatever they know, whomever they know, to join to these projects. And so this was part of the impetus for the project that Dan was talking about in terms for the talent project, because that project, we are going to be financing that project 100% through grants and donations and investors and whatnot, because what we want to do is to designate that project to be a subscription model, but exclusively for low-income residents. And so this is going to be a big changer for the city of Talent, which, as Dan said, is a small community. But it's going to hopefully, the word is going to propagate that community solar is something that people of low income can still access. And that's good for us and good for our communities and so on.
And I can add a few words that because in the state of California, we don't really quite have a community solar law that allow us to build these projects that are being mentioned by Timothy, Dan, and Ray here. For us, in many ways, it's an opportunity for us to really look at this and get people to see this is not just about solar access, it's not about energy access only, but this is about energy democracy. So the success and we measure is really about how much are people actually actively engaging in understanding what energy is in an environment where we are all taking energy for granted. So when we're talking about climate conversation and try to talk about climate solutions, how do we actually engage people into designing what that future looks like is it's not easily quantifiable, but in many ways it is the people, how we reorganize ourselves in order for us to move to redesigning that future instead of just repeating the same thing in hope for a different outcome.
And so that's a perfect segue, Crystal, thank you. And I want to combine your concept of organizing, and Ray, as you're touching on the low and moderate income or LMI possibilities that you're seeing, that equity is actually panning out. So something that we continue to hear, regardless of where we are within the renewable sector, is scale. And so I wonder if anyone wants to respond to what does community benefit solar look like at scale, and along that, what are some of the impediments or barriers that you're seeing in order for us to really be able to see this at scale?
Well, I can say a few words for how it applies in Oregon. Oregon limits community solar projects to 3 megawatts. You can't build anything larger than that and still be within the specs. But the interesting thing about again, I'm going to talk about the community solar project for the City of Talent, is that this is going to be financed by investors and grants and whatnot. However, once the investors are paid back, what remains is a revenue stream that goes directly to the city. The city is now owning the system, right? And this is a revenue stream that the city did not have before. And so it brings added benefits to the city hall, the city government, to be able to provide additional services to the community from the revenue that it gets from the community solar project. And so you're getting this feedback of people getting cheaper energy, people being able to spend their money locally because they have a little bit more money to spend. And then you have a city that is actually increasing their funding to provide additional services to its residents. It's just like a win-win. I can't see a single reason, maybe Dan or others can help, but I can't see a single reason why this would be a bad project, if you will.
I'll just echo and amplify that. We really see this as a model that can create an engine that supports more and more people participating and benefiting over time. And not only that, like part of the scale is how do we go from 1,000 members to 10,000 to 100,000? I mean, sky's the limit, right? And there are interconnection constraints and where are the roofs and the land and all that, right? There's all those issues. That's one piece of the scale, is building institutions that can ramp up that access and participation for communities. But then structuring the revenue flow so that, yes, there is some personal benefit for each of us individually, but there's also collective structure that allows us to reinvest that together, whether that's, as Ray just mentioned, as a municipal entity, or in our case, as a co-op, where now we have, a couple thousand members who get to decide where are we going to put $1 million or $2 million of money that the co-op now has that is equity owned by the membership as a whole. And how do we reinvest that in other solutions in our community in a way that benefits us all individually and benefits our community collectively?
Cool,
think
thank
scaling
you so
is
much.
a very interesting concept because a lot of times when we're so used to seeing things in a single issue way, scaling just means more project. But as we hear in tangible examples from Ray and Timothy here is like, there's so many more benefits that's measurable and immeasurable, and how you actually see them trickle in throughout the entire community or the entire city. That's what scaling really looks like in a very different way from what we generally are used to in scaling of like this project multiplied by 100, but it's really about how much is the wealth being multiplied in a quantifiable and in a qualitative and quantitative way.
So Anna, we'll kick it back to you to wrap us up with maybe one or two questions from today's webinar participants.
Yes, and thank you so much to our presenters. I'm finding myself wishing we had scheduled an hour and a half for this conversation because I feel like there's still lots of great content to learn from you all. But just I'll pull one question from the Q&A, and for folks that submitted questions, thank you so much. We got so many great questions. We will answer them in follow-up materials after this when we send the slides around. But the question I think we haven't touched on yet that we got is about how the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, impacts the way you're thinking about community ownership. So the question that we got was around how the new direct pay option within the Inflation Reduction Act might be influencing how you're thinking about community-owned models. I'll kind of stop there and see if folks have thoughts top of mind on that.
Yeah, so we have different ownership structures, obviously, several, but I think the one that's relevant here is the ownership model that is behind Ray there, where people actually own their share, the solar panels, and that is, there's an IRS private letter ruling that says that those benefits, the tax credits go to the owners. So it's a residential model. It's just like they're owning it on their roof in terms of the tax credits. So direct pay is not relevant there.
I will just say this is a slightly challenging question to answer because we're still in the comment process and awaiting final rules from the IRS about how it will all work. You know, there are lots of ways that you can create ownership structures that you know, qualify, whether it's under direct pay with a primarily nonprofit ownership entity, you know, using a traditional tax equity model or using the transferability approach. The way I see it, the IRA opens up some options. It doesn't really close any, and it's a little unclear about exactly what the structures are that will allow direct pay and transferability until those final rulings are coming up.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I will say that I will add to what Tim said that seems to benefit organizations like co-ops and nonprofits is that, I mean, we obviously cannot take the tax credit ourselves, but we can actually offset with the direct pay in terms of perhaps getting a 30% discount, if you will, from the cost of the project. And that cost can be then passed on to all the participants and such. So it's sort of a roundabout way of using tax money to essentially pay the vendor and not pay the participants.
I'll also just jump in and say that I think this also creates an opportunity for funders who want to support ownership of community solar, because there's, you know, the way in which we're thinking about it is how can we support that bridge loan with bridge loans, that period where groups may want to access the direct pay, but it's not yet available. So I think it's an opportunity for, you know, folks, whether it be in philanthropy or other areas, to think about ways in which they can support. And I think the IRA and some of the options coming from there open up that opportunity for other funders.
Great, thank you all so much. Again, wish we had more time, but thank you for weighing in very quickly on what I know is kind of a complicated subject. So I know we're at time. Thank you once again to all of our panelists. for your time and for your expertise. Thank you, Zoe, for being our moderator today, and Mac for providing our industry overview. To everyone on the line, we will send out the slides and the recording of this to all of you. We'll try to get to those questions we weren't able to get to in the chat. So once again, thank you all, and we will be sharing more opportunities for connecting with the National Community Solar Partnership with all of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.